In October 1937, soldiers in the Dominican Republic held out a sprig of a plant and asked people its name. If you said it the Spanish way, you lived, but if you couldn't, you were erased. An estimated 9,000 to 30,000 Haitian men, women, and children were executed because of this, yet it's rarely talked about. This is the story of the garnish you push to the side of your plate, and it has one of the darkest histories of any plant on this channel. I'm Megan Brame, and on this episode of the History of Plants, we're covering parsley. It allegedly grew from the blood of a slain prince, and its seeds were said to visit the devil before they sprout. Its story starts in ancient Greece, where parsley already belonged to the dead. Parsley's botanical name, Petroselinum crispum, acts like a clue for how this story begins. It comes from the Greek petroselinon, petros meaning rock, and selenon meaning celery, rock celery. A plant that grew wild in the crevices of Mediterranean limestone cliffs, tough enough to root in nearly soilless environment, ends up being rock celery. That tracks. The earliest written form of the word selenon appears as serino on Mycenaean linear B tablets from the late 2nd millennium BCE, making parsley one of the oldest documented plant names in Western civilization. Parsley belongs to the carrot family, which also includes celery, fennel, dill, cumin, coriander, and, notably, poison hemlock, the plant that killed Socrates. Keep that family connection in the back of your mind because it matters later. There are 3 main varieties. The curly type, crispum, is the one you've seen 1,000 times on restaurant plates and never eaten. The flat leaf or Italian type, Neapolitanum, has a stronger flavor and higher volatile oil content, which is why chefs use it in cooking rather than as a garnish. And the Hamburg or root type, Tuberosum, is grown in Central and Eastern Europe for its thick parsnip-like root rather than its leaves. The Greeks had a complicated relationship with parsley, and complicated might be an understatement. They dedicated it to Persephone, queen of the Underworld, the goddess who was abducted by Hades and condemned to spend half the year in the realm of the dead. The phrase, to be in need of parsley, was a common Greek euphemism for being at death's door. They wove parsley into wreaths, laid them on tombs, and scattered it over graves. The origin story they told about the plant is one of the grimmest in all of Greek mythology, if you can believe that. According to the myth, an infant prince named Otheltes was left on a bed of wild parsley by his nurse, Hypsipyle, who had stepped away to guide the approaching army of the 7 against Thebes to a water source. While she was gone, a serpent found the child and killed him. The heroes, interpreting the death as a terrible omen, renamed the prince Archimerus, meaning the forerunner of death. And according to legend, parsley first sprouted from the drops of his blood that soaked into the earth. The Nemean Games, one of the 4 great Pan-Hellenic athletic festivals, were founded in Archimerus' honor. Unlike other games, victors weren't crowned with olive or laurel, but parsley, which, if you stop here and think about the symbolism, it's pretty heavy. A wreath made from a plant that supposedly grew from a dead baby's blood and used to honor the dead is now placed on a champion's head. To me, that sounds a little memento mori-like, you know? If you're not familiar, it's an artistic concept that means remember death or remember you must die. I could be reading into that a little too much, though. I'm not a Greek scholar, so feel free to correct me in the comments. But the Romans inherited that association. They planted parsley on graves and connected it to Mercury, the guide of souls to the underworld. And they also discovered a more practical use. Parsley's extremely high chlorophyll content could mask the smell of alcohol and garlic. So they ate it at the end of banquets, which is where the modern breath freshener use comes from, and also, arguably, where the garnish tradition begins. Parsley shows up in archaeological contexts across the ancient Mediterranean, and its medicinal reputation was well established. Hippocrates prescribed it for kidney complaints, while Dioscorides documented it as a diuretic and digestive aid. Both Greek and Roman doctors prescribed it as an emmenagogue, a substance that stimulates menstrual flow, and as an abortifacient, a substance that terminates pregnancy. That use persisted quietly for centuries, and the chemistry behind it is crazy, but we'll get to that in part 3. When parsley reached Europe in the medieval period, the ancient death associations somehow got even weirder. Parsley has one of the slowest germination rates of any herb. Seeds can take up to 6 weeks to sprout, even under optimal conditions. In an era without an understanding of plant physiology, that agonizing wait was interpreted as evidence that something supernatural must be happening underground. The most common folk explanation was that parsley seeds had to travel to hell and back 7 times, or, in some versions, 9, before they were permitted to grow. And the seeds that never germinated, those were the ones the devil kept for himself. This led to the tradition of planting parsley on Good Friday, when the devil was believed to be powerless, ensuring safe passage for the seeds. Other traditions held that only witches or pregnant women could grow it successfully. Transplanting parsley from one garden to another was believed to invite the death of a family member. So if you've got someone who drives you crazy, do with that what you will. Also, giving parsley as a gift brought bad luck to the recipient. An Old English proverb declared, quote, "Parsley grows for the wicked, but not for the just." And a medieval British saying warned, "Fried parsley brings a man to his saddle and a woman to her grave." In rural England, when children asked where babies came from, the standard answer was in many communities that babies were dug up from parsley beds using golden shovels, which, given everything we've just covered about this plant's associations with death and the underworld and reproductive medicine, is either darkly ironic or disturbingly on brand. By the time the great herbalists got hold of parsley, they had centuries of accumulated tradition to work with. John Gerard's Herbal, published in 1597, recommended parsley for kidney stones as a diuretic and an aid in menstruation and childbirth. Gerard wrote that parsley seeds, quote, "open and provoke urine, dissolve kidney stones, and when given to women after delivery, they bring away the birth and afterbirth." Nicholas Culpeper, writing in 1653, took a page from the Romans and attributed the herb to Mercury. He claimed parsley was comfortable to the stomach, effective against the falling of sickness, useful for kidney stones, a remedy for venom, and capable of reducing swelling when applied to inflamed eyes. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of stuffing parsley poultice into my eyes, but I'm also not a doctor. He also provided a detailed recipe for treating jaundice and dropsy using parsley combined with fennel, anise, caraway, burnet, and saxifrage. In the Hebrew tradition, parsley carries a different but no less significant meaning. In the Passover Seder, many will serve parsley as karpas, which is dipped in salt water to represent both the tears of slavery in Egypt and the arrival of spring. And then we cut to the 20th century, where someone figured out how to use it as a weapon. Domesticated European parsley crossed the Atlantic with colonial powers and was introduced to Peru in the mid-16th century, snaking its way up the continent till it reached the settlements in Virginia by 1612. Within a few generations, parsley was a kitchen staple across the Americas, unremarkable and uncontroversial, just, another transplant from the old world, doing its job in the new. Before we get to 1937, though, I want to take a brief detour through a song you probably know. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. Simon and Garfunkel recorded it in 1966, but the song is much older, rooted in medieval English folk tradition. In folk herbalism, each one mentioned in the song carried symbolic weight. Sage for strength, rosemary for fidelity, thyme for courage, and parsley was associated with removing bitterness, which is about to take a completely different meaning. Let's head down to the island of Hispaniola, whose history has been defined by division. Haiti, a former French colony, gained independence in 1804 through the only successful large-scale slave revolution to produce an independent nation. The Dominican Republic, a former Spanish colony, achieved its own independence decades later, and both of them claim part of the island of Hispaniola. By the 1930s, the Dominican Republic was led by Rafael Trujillo, a dictator who had risen through U.S.-trained military during the American occupation, seized power in 1930, and spent the next 3 decades running the country as if it were his own private island. Trujillo was obsessed with race. His own grandmother was Haitian, and was a fact that he tried to erase by wearing pancake makeup to lighten his skin. He promoted an ideology called anti-Haitianismo, a radicalized nationalism that framed Haitians as culturally and biologically incompatible with Dominican society. Shortly before the massacre, he publicly accepted a gift of Hitler's Mein Kampf, whose radical theories he clearly embraced. By September 1937, when the Dominican economy was in crisis and sugar exports were fetching a fraction of their previous prices, Trujillo had been tightening the border. On October 2nd, at a celebration in the province of Dajabon near the border, he gave a short speech. Quote, "To the Dominicans who were complaining of the depredations by Haitians living among them, I have responded, I will fix this." And the killing began the next day. Between October 3rd and October 8th, Dominican soldiers swept through the border region and parts of the Cibao interior, targeting Haitian residents, Dominican Haitians, and anyone perceived as Haitian. The soldiers used machetes rather than rifles deliberately, so the regime could later claim that the killings were a spontaneous uprising by Dominican farmers rather than a coordinated military operation. Entire families were killed in their homes, People were chased down in fields and on roads, and those attempting to flee towards the border were hunted along the way. The mechanism used to identify victims was chillingly simple. Soldiers would confront someone with dark skin and hold up a sprig of parsley. ¿Cómo se llama esto? What is this called? And the answer determined everything. In Spanish, the word for parsley is perejil, and pronouncing it requires trilling the R, a sound that's natural in Spanish. But in Haitian Creole, the R is softer and flatter. A Creole speaker would say something closer to pesi or pehue. If the trilled R came out, you were Dominican, but if it didn't, you were Haitian. And if you were Haitian, you were killed. The term for this kind of test is a shibboleth and comes from the Book of Judges in the Hebrew Bible, where the Gileadites identified fleeing Ephraimites by asking them to pronounce shibboleth. The Ephraimites said sibboleth instead and were killed for it. The Parsley Massacre is the most devastating modern example of a linguistic shibboleth used as a tool for genocide. But I should say that historians debate how systematically the parsley test was actually applied. In many cases, skin color alone was enough. Some people killed were bilingual Dominican Haitians who could have passed the test but were executed regardless. Some Dominicans were misidentified as Haitian and killed. The test was not a precise instrument. It was a pretext giving a veneer of method to what was, at its core, a racially motivated mass killing. Estimates of the dead range from 9,000 to 30,000. The killing lasted 5 to 8 days. Afterward, Trujillo imposed a media blackout, prohibiting newspapers from covering the events, and publicly denied any government involvement. The Haitian president, Stenio Vansan, initially suppressed discussion of the massacre on his own side, partly because he had a cooperative relationship with Trujillo's regime and had received financial support from it. It took 2 years of silence before protests in Port-au-Prince forced Vincent to seek an internal investigation. Under pressure from the United States, Mexico, and Cuba, Trujillo eventually agreed to pay an indemnity of $525,000, roughly $9 million in today's money, to the Haitian government. No senior Dominican official was ever prosecuted, and no one was held accountable. The Dominican government's official position framed the massacre as a response to illegal immigration by, quote, undesirable Haitians. Trujillo then embarked on a program to Dominicanize the border region, building infrastructure, importing Dominican settlers, partnering with the Catholic Church, and wholesale erasing Haitian cultural presence from the frontier. The massacre was largely forgotten outside Hispaniola for decades, and it wasn't until writers began to reclaim the story that it re-entered public consciousness. Edwige Dantica's 1998 novel The Farming of Bones tells the story through the eyes of a young Haitian domestic servant trying to survive a massacre, with the word perejil hanging over every page. Rita Dove's Pulitzer Prize-winning poem Parsley meditates on Trujillo's obsession with the trilled R, exploring how a single sound became the difference between life and death. And Dominican-American scholar Eduard Paulino spent years interviewing both survivors and perpetrators, describing the massacre as, quote, arguably the largest mass murder in the Americas targeting people of African descent in the 20th century. An annual commemoration called the Border of Lights is now held in Dajabon, organized by international scholars and activists, including many Dominican and Haitian Americans, working to ensure the event is neither forgotten nor sanitized. And if dark histories hiding in plain sight are your kind of thing, hit subscribe. We, sadly, find them in every plant we cover. The herb that grew from the blood of a murdered prince, that the devil supposedly claimed before it would sprout, had now been used to identify people for slaughter. But the chemistry within its leaves has its own story to tell, and some of it helps explain why this plant has been entangled with death and reproduction since the ancient world. Parsley's ancient reputation as a plant connected to death, reproduction, and the underworld wasn't superstition. The chemistry backs it up. The volatile oil in parsley leaves and seeds contain two compounds that explain centuries of medical use, Apiol and myristicin. Apiol is a known uterine stimulant that increases smooth muscle contractions in the uterus, which is why Greek and Roman physicians prescribed parsley to stimulate menstrual flow, and why midwives across Europe used it for centuries to induce labor. In 1855, two French doctors named Jaurès and Homo isolated Apiol and demonstrated its effectiveness for treating amenorrhea and menstrual disorders. It was subsequently marketed under brand names like Ergiapol and Salutol. At higher doses, though, Apiol functions as an abortifacient, and it was used for that purpose well into the 19th and early 20th centuries, though typically unspoken. spoken unless you knew the right people. The line between amenagog and abortifacient was historically a matter of dosage and intent, and parsley sat squarely on that line for over 2,000 years. So when medieval folklore warned that only pregnant women or witches could grow parsley, or that fried parsley brings a man to his saddle and a woman to her grave, those sayings weren't so much random as more like encoded warnings about a plant that had real physiological effects on the reproductive system, passed down through generations of women who knew exactly what the herb could do, but couldn't say it so openly in a society that would punish them for it. Myristicin occupies a completely different pharmacological space. It activates the enzyme glutathione and S-transferase, which plays a critical role in neutralizing carcinogens in the body. The compound has demonstrated chemopreventative activity in laboratory settings, meaning it may help prevent cancer from developing in the first place rather than treating it after the fact. The same plant that can end a pregnancy contains a compound that might prevent cancer. Speaking of, let's talk about apigenin, a flavone found in parsley that has attracted serious attention in cancer research. Studies have found that apigenin can inhibit tumor growth and induce apoptosis, programmed cell death, in various cancer cell lines, including breast, prostate, and colon. A 2016 study demonstrated anti-proliferative effects on mammary cells specifically. Apigenin isn't a drug yet, and the distance between laboratory cell lines and clinical treatment is enormous, but the compound's consistency across multiple studies has kept it on the research radar. Nutritionally, parsley is absurdly dense for something that most people throw away. Raw parsley contains approximately 1,640 micrograms of vitamin K per 100 grams, which is nearly 1,000% of the recommended daily intake and more than any other commonly consumed food in Western diets. For context, boiled kale provides 817, spinach provides 483, broccoli, 141. You see the difference. Vitamin K is essential for blood clotting factor synthesis and plays a critical role in maintaining bone mineral density, which means the pretty little plate decor is, gram for gram, one of the most nutritionally potent things on that plate. It is also exceptionally rich in vitamin C, vitamin A, iron, calcium, potassium, manganese, and folic acid. The chlorophyll content is the highest of any common culinary herb, which is why the Romans used it as a breath freshener at banquets and why you might have been told to chew parsley after eating garlic. Recent research has continued to expand the profile. A 2024 study documented anti-hemostatic and anti-thrombotic activities in parsley extracts, showing that the compounds in the plant may affect blood clotting pathways. A 2021 study examined the impact of parsley compounds on oxidative stress in the brain tissue, with implications for neuroprotective applications. An ongoing phytochemical analysis continues to identify new bioactive compounds in both the leaf and the seed oil. One more thing worth mentioning, and it connects back to the greater carrot family. Parsley's close relatives include some of the most useful plants in the kitchen: carrots, celery, fennel, dill, cumin, coriander, but they also include poison hemlock, Comia maculatum, and fool's parsley, Ethusa cynapium. Both are toxic and have been known to be fatally confused with parsley in the wild. Fool's parsley in particular looks almost identical to the flat-leaf parsley to an untrained eye, and ingestion can cause severe poisoning. The ancient world's cautious, death-tinged relationship with parsley may have had an extremely practical dimension. In a family that includes the plant that killed Socrates, treating any unfamiliar member with suspicion is a survival instinct. So how did we get here? How did a plant with this much history, this much chemistry, and this much cultural weight end up as the single most ignored item on a restaurant plate? The transition happened in the mid-20th century when American restaurants adopted curly leaf parsley as a mandatory garnish. A sprig on the side of every dish, from diner omelets to steakhouse fillets, signified freshness while filling empty space on the plate, or adding a pop of green next to the beige and brown of mid-century American cooking. Nobody ate it, and no one was expected to. It was essentially window dressing. The poet Ogden Nash captured the sentiment in 3 words: parsley is garsly. The irony is that the curly leaf variety that became the universal garnish is the least flavorful of the 3 types. It has significantly lower volatile oil content than the flat leaf Italian parsley, which is why professional chefs overwhelmingly prefer the flat leaf variety for actual cooking. The garnish era effectively trained an entire generation of Americans to associate parsley with decoration rather than food, burying its culinary identity under decades of being the thing you push to the side of the plate with your fork. But that's been changing. The broader culinary shift towards ingredient-forward cooking and the influence of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and Latin American cuisines, where parsley is a primary ingredient rather than an afterthought, has slowly rehabilitated its reputation in Western kitchens. Tabbouleh, chimichurri, gremolata, salsa verde. These are parsley-driven dishes that treat the herb as the star rather than the set dressing. And there's an ecological dimension worth mentioning too. Parsley is a critical larval host for the black swallowtail butterfly. The caterpillars feed on leaves of plants from the carrot family, and adults act like pollinators for the flowers. Growing parsley in a home garden creates a small but meaningful link in the pollinator corridor, which is a more useful contribution to the world than decorating a plate of chicken parmesan. No offense to your chicken parmesan recipe, by the way. I'm sure it's fantastic. IUCN lists parsley as a least concern globally, which is unsurprising for a plant that has been cultivated on every inhabited continent for centuries. In Northern Europe, it's classified as an archaeophyte, a non-native species introduced before the year 1500 that has become a permanent part of the landscape. Growing it yourself will require patience. Parsley seeds have an erratic and low germination rate even under ideal conditions and can take several weeks to sprout, especially in cool, wet soil. Soaking the seeds overnight seems to help, for the record, and so does planting on Good Friday, if you believe the folklore. The devil supposedly has to visit them 7 times before they'll grow, so you might as well give yourself every advantage. I'm Megan Brame, and thanks for watching. For commentary, ad-free 4K episodes, and bonus content, join me over on Patreon. Your support there is what makes this episode possible, so thank you so much to those who have already joined. And if you want another story about an herb that's been fighting humanity for centuries, check out the basil episode, the leaf that could supposedly create scorpions, and had one of the greatest botanists in history throwing up his hands and saying, "I'm out." Until next time, greenies, stay curious, and don't forget to flourish.